Okay, this video is from Best Christian Art. We're continuing on in the chapter. It's like part 2 of the chapter about the Renaissance and the Reformation. Okay, we're going to be starting with the painting on page 353 if you're following along in your book. The painting is Martin Luther at the Diet of Worms. Okay, this one's by Anton Werner. And so it's a great painting and it's an incredible story. Martin Luther is a very interesting guy. He's probably, he's a little crazy, but all geniuses are crazy. He was quite entertaining. He was upset about the sale of indulgences by the Catholic Church. And he also traveled to Rome and he felt it was corrupt. Like I just pointed out with the last video, though, they did some really good things. Let me just show that again because it's so important. This is, Pope Julius. And Pope Julius was a badass of a pope, okay? He would get on a horse like a general and fight against the French or whoever was invading Italy. He would fight against the other city-states in Italy that were, he felt mistreating the Vatican and the Catholic Church. He took money, yes, from the indulgence, but he put it to good use. He had Michelangelo paint the Sistine Chapel and make some other paintings. He had Raphael, paint the School of Athens in the Stanza Signatura room, the Communion celebration painting, the Mount Parnassus celebration of poetry and whatnot, and a bunch of other paintings. So he commissioned like the greatest art in the history of the world, okay? This is Bramante working with him on redesigning St. Peter's Basilica, and Michelangelo and Raphael also helped with that. So I just show this to you because he was an extraordinary man, and he did extraordinarily great things for the Catholic Church and the Christian religion. So there were some great things happening, and I think Martin Luther missed the boat on that, okay? And Martin Luther, his way of sort of speaking out against the Catholic Church was he basically said, look, the only thing that matters is the Bible. And he said the only thing that matters is grace. The only thing that matters is faith. Sola gratia, sola fide, sola biblia, sola scriptura. Okay, but, the Catholic Church had been around for hundreds of years before the Bible was consolidated. And the Bible was consolidated by the Catholic Church. And he didn't like the book of James, which said, man is not saved by faith alone. It's also by his works, his good deeds. Luther did do some good things. Luther pushed to allow priests to be married, and I think that's a good thing. You get a much wider talent pool of men if they're allowed to have a wife. We love women. We can't help it. So if you tell us we can't have a wife, you immediately dramatically shrink the number of guys willing to be a priest, and it's harder to find talented priests. The other thing is the families back in those days, they were used to having 10 children. So if one of the boys, and they're real poor, one of the boys goes to be a priest, it's not that big of a deal. The parents are still going to get some grandchildren. But if you've only got 1 or 2 kids, you don't want your kid going to be a priest and not providing you with any grandchildren. Okay, so Martin Luther was a very vituperous writer, and he also was great at drama. When they first sent him a papal bull that he was going to be excommunicated, he burned it. So here he is speaking at the Diet of Worms. The city is Worms. He's in front of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, and he said, he made his famous speech, I cannot and will not recant anything. If there is an error, show me the error in my books, and I will be the first to throw them into the fire. I cannot go against conscience, for to go against conscience is neither right nor safe. I do not trust popes and councils because they have contradicted each other. Here I stand, so help me God. Amen. Okay, it was an incredible speech. And so that's the great painting. And unfortunately, though, it set off the Protestant Reformation, which broke apart Christendom in the 1500s. And, what I really wish is they should have made an order for Luther, the Lutheran monks or something. That would have been better, I think. Like you had the Dominicans from St. Dominic, like you had the Franciscans from St. Francis of Assisi, like you had the Augustinian order. Martin Luther was an Augustinian monk. And I think, Protestantism is kind of bleak, this whole idea of be good so you don't burn in hell. And I think a little too much emphasis on that rather than some of the enjoyment of daily life, Christian aesthetics, the message of Christ. Be nice to each other, forgive each other, get along, give each other the benefit of doubt. First Corinthians, St. Peter and St. Paul, love's the most important thing. I mean, why is a kid, why is a mother the most important person in the world to raise a child? Second is the father, then the grandparents. Is because they love the kid. And that love fixes a whole bunch of things and makes a whole bunch of things go well. And that's also why schools can't teach like parents can, because they don't love the kid, okay? That's why the medical system's all screwed up, because it doesn't love the patients. All right, well, anyways, that's the great painting of Martin Luther, The Diet of Worms. That's actually the painting on the cover of one of my other books, Martin Luther, The Diet of Worms. I put that on the cover of my book about the Medical Reformation because I thought it was such an awesome painting. There it is, Martin Luther at the Diet of Worms on my cover of my other book called The Medical Reformation. All right, so the next painting here, let me get to this one, is... this is one of the popes here. This is Pope Leo X, Giovanni Medici by Raphael. And it's not the most complimentary painting in the world. He's looking pretty fat. But he actually was a pretty good guy. He was a great patron of the academics and the arts. He funded the universities. He funded ancient Greek translators of his books, other scholars. He funded a lot of great painters, great writers, poetry, architecture, scholars of ancient Greek history. He obviously underestimated Luther and the Protestant Reformation, and that was pretty stupid. But, I've read a bunch of biographies of Luther, and I've read a whole bunch of books on the Reformation, and I came away liking him. Yeah, he screwed up, but he was actually a good guy. And they were doing some good things. I mean, look at the Catholic Church. It's produced the best art, the best science, the best universities, the best literature, the best sculpture. It's produced a lot of the best that mankind has ever produced. That's one of the reasons why I stayed a Christian, even though people told me, why don't you try this or this or that? It's because, I want to be part of the great artistic tradition. I wanted to be a writer. I mean, unfortunately, I make all my money from clinical medicine, so it kind of works me into the ground. I don't have that much time or energy left over for other things, but I do the best I can because the Christian aesthetic tradition, it's the best. It's the best by a factor of 1,000. There's nothing even close. This multiculturalism is nonsense. There's nothing like Christianity for the production of magnificent painting, magnificent literature. It's incredible, magnificent music. That's why it's such a great thing. I mean, amongst other things, the message of Christ. Yeah, sure, all that fine. But we're talking about Christian aesthetics here. And now here's the sad outcome of Luther. Luther's Protestant Reformation did a lot of things he would not have wanted. And I know Luther talks about this too. So Charles V sacked Rome in 1527, and it was basically a disaster. The Roman population decreased from 55,000 to 10,000. 12,000 people were killed. Many others fled. The nuns were raped by the Protestant soldiers, many of them from Germany. And it was just a brutalization and a destruction of Rome. Okay, what good was that? How is that Christian? All right? It was stupid. It was, in a sense, like a civil war, and it was a disaster, and it was bad, okay? And the behavior was just off the charts bad. And what came out of Protestantism, okay? Luther had the backing of the Protestant princes, but what you're doing with this scenario when the secular rulers take over the religion is it becomes secularized and it becomes political, expedient for the ruler, and it becomes less religious in the long term. And that's been the case over time. The Catholic Church is still intact. Don't get me wrong, the leaders of the Catholic Church at the present are about the worst ever. So it's been corrupted too, but at least the Catholic Church amongst the followers is still a great thing. You don't need organized religion to be a Christian. I don't go to church just because I don't know of any priests that are worth listening to locally for me. I wish there was one, but they've also wimped out because they've allowed themselves to follow all these stupid rules for money that they're not allowed to say anything interesting. Okay, so what's the point? The church should be somewhere where they talk about whatever's interesting at the moment. They should talk about nutrition in church. They should talk about health. They should talk about whatever the community needs to hear. But they don't tend to do that. They tend to just read some same old boring thing out of the missalette or whatever that they've been doing for 50 years, and it's boring. Okay, here's Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, who became Pope Paul III, and he commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Last Judgment of the Sistine Chapel. He also approved of the Order of the Jesuits as founded by St. Ignatius. And he played a role in important parts of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. This was painted by Raphael in 1512, and he's an intelligent guy. These are powerful, smart families in Italy in the 1500s. Farneses, the Medicis, the Roveros. Okay, it was an awesome time. Okay, here's Martin Luther and his wife. Martin Luther, after the Protestant Reformation, he got married and had several children. And apparently his wife was very good to him. They were very close and loving. She had been a former nun. And the paintings by Lucas Cranach, the German painter who was a friend of Luther, and he made some other pretty good paintings. I like this one here called The Fountain of Youth by Lucas Cranach from 1546. The old people enter on one side, kind of all old, fragile, debilitated. They come out on the other side, young, energetic, robust, and virile, and ready for a fun party. I wish it was that easy. Okay, here's a painting called The Schism by Jehan Vibert from 1874. And so in this painting, there were different times. There was the double papacy where it went to Avignon in France, and it took a long time for it to come back to Italy. And a lot of the things that religious scholars argue about, in my opinion, are pretty stupid. They'll argue about, is the communion wafer the real body of Christ, or is it just metaphorical? I really don't care about those things. I don't think Christ would care if we care about those things. He'd want you to be nice to each other and follow his commandments and, love thy neighbor, be nice to each other, give each other the benefit of the doubt, make the world better for each other. That's the big thing of his message. I don't think he cares too much about all this dogma. Okay, here's a painting by, it was actually a woodcut. This is by Albrecht Durer, the great German artist from 1513. He wanted Erasmus to speak up more strongly against the Catholic Church. Erasmus, though, wanted to keep Christendom together. Erasmus was very clever. He was sort of a counterpart to Luther, but Luther was aggressive, had the support of the princes. He was protected after, the initial stuff at Wartburg, and he was a real powerful, funny, entertaining speaker, versus Erasmus was kind of wimpy, and he defended the Catholic Church, but not that strongly. Okay, this knight right here, sort of the knight of faith, reminds me also of the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish Socrates, who wrote about being a knight of faith. And I find Kierkegaard very entertaining writer, very brilliant. I made videos about him in the past, Søren Kierkegaard. A lot of his advice, I think it's true, and I believe it, and I follow it. Okay, here's the painter, here's the writer Erasmus, painted by Hans Holbein, 1523, his portrait. And he was a brilliant guy, but like I said, he sort of played it safe and didn't really engage in the arguments with Luther as much as you would have hoped he did. He had written books like In Praise of Folly, and he was super popular and funny and clever. And I'm just going to show you a little bit more about Protestantism. So, like I said, too, the things Christians agree about are a million times more important than the things they don't agree about. Some quotes of Erasmus. Eagles don't chase flies. To interweave aphorisms is to make language sparkle with gems from antiquity. Your library is your paradise. By labeling the new learning as heresy, they make orthodoxy synonymous with ignorance. Okay. Some valid quotes. And then here's the things I really didn't like about the Protestant Reformation. Basically, they had this idea that the paintings and the sculptures inside of churches were idolatry. And so they would tear them down. They'd rip down paintings, burn them in a fire. They would tear down statues. That's barbarism. Okay, another point, too, is the Catholics don't pray. They don't worship the saints or worship Mary. They might pray to a saint with the idea of the saint, please, that you get to talk to God sometimes. Please ask God if he'll do me a favor, okay? So it's intercession. And the gist of it is that if you pray to a saint and your wish doesn't come true, you can then pray to some other saint, and maybe they'll have more influence on that particular request. And some people are scared to pray directly to God because they're afraid if God rejects them, then they're screwed. There is no alternative way to pray if you're rejected. Okay, so anyways, though, and I've heard another quote. I think it was Bishop Barron who said it. You know, a movement has gone bad when it starts destroying beautiful things. Yeah, the glorification of God through these paintings and sculpture is a good thing. You go into these Protestant churches and they're sort of bleak. If you're not allowed to enjoy painting or make a painting, all you can do is read the Bible. You know, that gets a little boring, okay? We want to sing songs. And Luther, don't get me wrong, was good for music, but still, there's something kind of bleak and austere about the whole Protestant mentality. It's a lot of medieval theology and not enough Christian aesthetic beauty and goodness, you know. The strain of Catholicism largely comes out of a Greek Aristotelian worldview versus the strain of Augustinian Catholicism through predestination, through Protestantism. A lot of that comes out of Plato's Platonic worldview. And Nietzsche had even said that a lot of Christianity was Platonism for the masses, okay? And Schopenhauer would say that religion is metaphysics for the masses. So all I'm saying is Catholicism is more sustainable. It has more fun, interesting, enjoyable stuff for everybody. And most of this dogma is a pain in the butt, you know, and I don't really care about it that much. I care about just the message of Christ, okay? That's what makes people happy. That's what creates good communities. And all this stuff about tearing down churches, I think it's terrible. I didn't mean to make myself big here. Let me get myself out of the way. What happened? Where did my screen go? I think I got it. Okay, there it is. I got to find it. Sorry about that. Sometimes I hit a short key button and I didn't even realize I hit it. Okay, let me go to the video here. So this is just showing you what a Protestant church looks like. And I want you to see it, how boring that is. I don't know if you've ever seen a Catholic church. In a Catholic church, there would be sculptures all over the place, paintings all over the place. They're just a lot more beautiful. Take a look at a Catholic church in France, for example, a Catholic cathedral. It's magnificent. It's awesome. It's the most beautiful buildings ever made in the history of the world. The Cathedral of Notre Dame, okay, Cathedral of Chartres. They're just awesome. Versus a lot of these places, they're kind of boring, these Protestant places. There was the great Catholic architect, A.W. Pugin, in 1800s, mid-1800s in England, and he said, everything sacred and magnificent about a cathedral is Catholic. Everything vulgar and disgusting and boring is Protestant. So don't get me wrong, there's been some great Protestant writers, and later on there were great Protestant painters, and there were some great Protestant preachers. And I can remember back when I was in high school, I had to read, Jonathan Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, a pretty dramatic sermon. And I've read some other Protestant scholars who I liked. I certainly liked John Henry Newman, the Catholic scholar of the mid-1800s as well. So anyways, that's where we're going to call it at that for today. Hope that was interesting.